And there are moments that happen hundreds and thousands of times as a gymnast where you leap off the floor and you do not know where your body's going to land. And you have to figure it out, right? And yes, you practice for it and you train for it and you drill for it. But there is that moment where you leap, where all you can do is trust. And you have to trust yourself.
Welcome to the Evolutionary Leadership Podcast. My name is Gibrán Rivera and I'm a facilitator. Here, I am inviting you into a conversation with remarkable leaders who are committing their lives to the evolution of consciousness and culture. In this episode, I get to interview my friend and colleague, Tuesday Ryan-Hart. Tuesday is a facilitator like myself. Her and our friend Tim Mary have recently launched a new firm. It's called Find the Outside, and I really love their tagline. It says that everything we do is how change begins. And working with Tuesday, I really know that to be true. Tuesday is concerned with big change, with system change, with placing equity at the center of everything that she does. I get to learn from Tuesday and to collaborate with her on a couple of clients. Over the last number of years, we have partnered with Bali, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, and we have really done a beautiful and deep work together there. And we are also partnering on some work with the Open Society Foundations and with their US offices. I'm looking forward to seeing how that unfolds. In this episode, we talk about facilitation, and I know that many of you have wanted to learn more about that and how we think about that work, so I think you'll enjoy it. We also talk about trauma and about somatics and the power of embodiment. And we talk about radical responsibility. We even have an invitation here because both Tuesday and myself are concerned by a culture that seems to really center victimhood. And we are curious about what it would be like to open up brave spaces and to create alternative spaces where different modalities and different ways of being together can be explored. Let us know what you think. As you know, this is still the early days of the Evolutionary Leadership Podcast, and your feedback is invaluable. Enjoy the conversation. I certainly found it very powerful. Thank you for tuning in. Tuesday, I am so excited that you accepted my invitation into this podcast.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, and especially excited because you were just on my podcast earlier this week. So I feel like it's a little bit of a continuation of a conversation, and I'm looking forward to it.
I do too. That was really a good conversation with you and Tim, and that's a big part of what I want to talk about here. I want to ask you about what you two are doing together. Tell me a little bit about The Outside.
Sure. So The Outside is our company that we actually just launched in March, which has me amazed. So after years of working together, my business partner, Tim Mary, and I decided to more formally work collaboratively. So both of us had independent brands, and of course we have our own companies. And the scale of work we were being asked into was bigger and bigger. And so our work as The Outside is around systems change that has that I know that feels kind of jargony. So we found ourselves being asked into work where folks said we actually need the system to change. We know we can't program our way out of this issue, right? We need to have a larger systems view. And what we know about that kind of change is it can and does happen all of the time, but often issues of equity are not at the center of that change. And so one of the things we say is like people make all sorts of change without making much difference, right? That's kind of like a one-liner.
I like that a lot. I like that. Yeah, that's really good.
Good, right? And everyone's been there, right? Everything changes, the people change, the structures change, but actually at the end of the day, nothing fundamentally has changed. There's no difference in who has the wealth or power or resources in the system, or the folks who are recipients of the services of a system. Like nothing is fundamentally changed for them. So let me give you an example. I was involved in some homelessness work years ago. And I loved that work. And we reimagined the homelessness system here in my community. It was 3.5 years of work, really good people, really huge amounts of effort. And at the end of that redesign, the question still is, why are African Americans, who are only 25% of the population in my town, 80% of the people who are homeless? There is no other explanation for that. Even if you account for education or job, there's no other explanation besides racism. And so then that project started to take on race in a different way. And so I and I think my partner Tim. But I really just prefer to talk for myself right now. So I don't want to do a lot of and Tim. So I'm just going to talk for myself and my part of the outside.
Well, I love Tim, but I'm quite excited that you, Tuesday, are the guest on the podcast. And as I mentioned in the intro, you and I, that's one of the reasons for you and I work together. Yeah. And I don't get to facilitate, I don't get to co-facilitate with a lot of people. So it's really exciting to be in this particular chat with you specifically.
Yes, thank you. And I guess I'm just aware that when I talk about the outside, it's not just me, but for today, it's going to be me. Right? So we're just going to do that. And I'm not going to talk about that piece anymore. And I kept coming into change processes, right? So having come from, and I know we're going to talk about my background more, but more from movement space where there is an analysis. I was brought into systems project where there wasn't an analysis, and it felt like I could either do kind of movementy stuff or I could do systemy stuff, but those two worlds weren't talking together. And so the outside is our effort to kind of bring those two pieces together. So if we're going to take on systems change, one of the things we are looking for, asking about, vetting our clients for is, are they willing to have equity at the center of that change? Are they willing to talk about, kind of the easy things around equity? Easy, none of it's easy, but like access, right? Access and inclusion, for example. And that's great. Most folks want to go there. I think, there's something, no one's going to say we should be less accessible or inclusive, right? That's never a language folks are going to
right.
They're always going to say they want that. And so that's great. Yep, that's a good on-ramp. And we're assessing our clients. Are you really interested in moving power? Are you really interested in talking about where wealth and resources are? Do you actually want to shift the system where those who do not only have access to, but can impact how the system is changing for their benefit? So that's been, I think, my work for a number of years. And the outside just launched in March as a formalization. As our work got bigger and bigger and required more, we decided that it was worth coming together. So our clients were starting to not want kind of a single named brand. They wanted more of an organization or a company. And so that's why we formed, and we're off. We're going like crazy, and it's fantastic.
That sounds amazing. And I definitely want to dig in more, particularly around your approach to equity and how you're making progress centering that. It's just yesterday, I was facilitating, and there were two women that are Boston-based women that have been doing this equity and inclusion work for a long time, for a decade. And it was really awesome to me to be with them in this moment when there seems to be a heightened awareness of what this work is, and that these people like yourself, people like them, have actually been building, right, or the field and this work for a long time as this moment now arises. So I really want to talk about what you're seeing, what is different now,
right,
in terms of how people are talking about equity. And if you forgive me, or indulge me instead of forgive me, I would love to know something about you first. Like I want to have a sense of, where did you come from? And I don't mean like where do you live, but tell me a little bit about your story.
Well, I think where I live is really important, actually, so we can talk about that. I think it is important. You all podcast listeners can't see it. He just rolled his eyes. But it's what you did. I'm just saying. I live in Columbus, Ohio. And that is important only because I think an important part of my story is being a Midwesterner, right? I have lived in Iowa and Ohio. Those are the only two places I've ever lived in my whole life. And I think I didn't actually realize that there was something that's culturally Midwest until I started traveling a lot. And of course there is. And there's, a lot that would be negative. I know folks tend to think of us as the red states or the flyover states, or however people who live on the coast tend to think about those of us in the middle of the country. But it has been, as I travel, I realize it's actually quite an important part of who I am, to be a Midwesterner, right? And what that means. I think a little more self-effacing, a little more humble, a little more practical, a little less, I think that's just important. Being from Ohio is important.
Thank you. And I did not mean to we do work together, so we do tease each other. And one of the things I tease Tuesday about is not coming from a real city.
Yeah.
But I don't really mean it. I
know.
I mean, it's definitely not Boston.
Well, what is, right?
Exactly.
And also, thank goodness. But so if you want to know where should we start a little bit about me? What do you want to know? Could you ask me
Yeah. I honestly, what's in the back of my head is the way a good story starts. Mm-hmm. When it says like once upon a time. So one of my assumptions, of the assumptions that I'm making is that you were not born awake. That you were probably born amazing, but in terms of the development of a political consciousness, right? And so I'm curious to learn a little bit about your trajectory. How does somebody like you end up doing this really big system work that centers equity? But I'm curious as to the beginning. And I'm not trying to answer the question for you, I swear. But one of the things you say a lot that I love and I want to get to is your mother taught you that women are your friends.
Yeah.
In the years working with you, I've often heard you say that, and it always moves me, right? Mm-hmm. It makes me even more aware of a certain strength that you bring. And so I'm curious as to how that comes about.
Yeah. Oh, great. So in my community, one of the questions we sometimes ask is, if you were born a question, what would it be? Right. With the idea that everyone was born a question, right? In some ways, we're the answer to a question.
Oh man, I love that.
Right. So when I was first asked that question, what question were you born? My answer was immediate. And my answer was, the question I came in carrying was, how do I help these people be together better? And so that has been like, just from cradle, my question. Now, of course, what that has meant as I get older is these people includes me, right? It's not me just acting on the world, right? It's actually like, how do I be better with these people? How am I helping these people who are me, like my little cast of characters inside of me? How am I helping them be better together? But of course, right? Fractals, it all fractals up, like from the cast of characters, the different parts of me, how I help them to be better together, how I help people in my family be better together, which of course in your early life is what you're working with, right? And then how do I out in the world help people be together better? And so that, I think, is really one of the guiding questions of my life, except it's not an acting on the world, it's a being with. And so, and I think that that's a big shift. And so I think what's maybe important to understand is that I am a Black, white, biracial woman who was born in the early 70s, mid 70s. And so that wasn't, there weren't a ton of us then, right? It was kind of a thing to have a white mother and a Black father. And that was a tumultuous early life. And I think that's where I started, how do you help these people be together better? And no matter what was happening in that particular life, my mother always turned to her women friends. We always had very good women friends. And that was kind of a drum she beat for me, right? Which is like, women are your friends. You turn to women in your life. And that's been an incredibly important lesson for me. Now, I did also, I feel like if I mention my mom, I feel like I really, as a key influence on me, I also really need to mention my grandfather, who is my father's father, who was also just like, he was for me. And so I had two people in my early life. As much as there was a lot of pain and trauma and drama and hardship, I had two people in my life who were fully for me. And I think that makes a difference. And so I don't even know what to say. I went to school. You might ask about athletics later. I'll talk about that. But I think if we talk about the women piece, when I was a junior in college, we had to do a internship. So I walked into a rape crisis center. I don't know what made me do that. I don't know why I picked that as an internship. It was only going to be like a 9-week thing. And I walked in and I felt like I was at home. And that's so strange for people because, of course, people hear rape. It's called sexual assault services now. Maybe not even that at this point, but it was called rape crisis at that point. And I think folks find that strange that would be a place that I would find home. But what was amazing to me was that these were women, primarily at that point, cisgendered women, who were coming together and helping each other. And like, that is as simple as it was. That was like the whole beauty magic of it. We can do something about this together. And the action was direct. It was helping people who called you on the phone who had just been raped. It was going to the hospital. It was accompanying people to court, but it was also systemic, right? So we're going to help the folks who are surviving this issue, but we're also then going to work on laws and policies, right? And so just like for me had that breadth of action that was quite appealing to me, that felt more holistic, and it was woman-centered and woman-led and women ran. And so that's what's interesting to me now. I did that work for a number of years, went on, got my master's degree, worked in domestic violence, and it was not until I went out on my own that I actually worked much with men. Like my whole early professional life was only with women. I'm not sure I've ever had a male boss.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
It has been, right? So when I had my first child, I was working at a state domestic violence coalition. And, like every mom falls in love with their first baby in a way that's like, maybe I should be home, right? Like maybe that's what I'm actually supposed to do with my life. I should just like give it all up because there's nothing more important than this being. And of course, many of us don't have the means to do that. But if you have the means to do that, you consider that. But what kept me working was working with women. I worked with 11 other women, and my boss said, bring your baby to work.
Wow.
And so I brought him to work with me for the first 6 months of his life. I would do calls and I would be holding him, or someone would take him and he had his bassinet in my office. And that really kept me working, which now my kids are older, they're 15 and 10. Like I understand that I am a working mom. That's also another like key piece of who I am. And I understand that it was women who were able to help me do that. They were able to help me contribute both to my family in very real ways and to the work that was my passion in really real ways.
Thank you so much for sharing so generously. I'm really moved by this story and by your awareness by the way you tell it. There's a power in it that's moving me. Right, that is moving me. So I'm really grateful for that. So much to ask, and you did say maybe you'll ask me about athletics, and I cannot go anywhere else. One of the things I know one of the things I know about you is that you're an athlete. That you are a marathon runner, that you just ran a triathlon, that being in this body, right, in a way that is both powerful and healthy is something central to your life. And I would love to hear more about that and how that informs you. Sure.
Well, first, I feel like I want to say I did run a triathlon and I will never run a triathlon again. That was the single worst athletic experience of my life. But you got to try things. So, and I just feel like I got to put a disclaimer on there. Like I am not a triathlete and I learned that lesson well.
Okay.
But I did do it. I
think that's a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. I feel like, thank you for mentioning it because it's never happening again. So I was an athlete from an early age. So let me just say that. So I started gymnastics at 5.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, very early. And gymnastics, if folks know much about it, if you're a competitive gymnast, it takes over your life, right? So that was what I did from the time I was 5 until I got injured at 16. And so, although that feel like now in my mid 40s, that feels like a short period of my life, I think that age, like those years are foundational. And so I learned a lot there that I think is impacted my professional life now. I'm happy to talk about running and how that works for me now too. But I think what I learned as a gymnast is a couple of things. One is to be in my body. I've mentioned that there were just like hard things happening at home that would separate me from my body, abuse and things like that would actually move me out of my body. And so to come back to my body in a very real, tangible, you have to be in your body. You are balancing on a beam that's 3 7/8 inches wide, right? Your hands have to grab that bar, right? You have to, like those things that continue to bring me back to my body multiple days a week for multiple hours a day is something I can't underestimate for my experience of embodiment. It's just, I always say, if I get a new concept or if I hear something new or if I learn something new, I don't know it until I feel it in my body. And so that's why if I learn something new, I go for a run because that's how I integrate it. So there's something actually quite important from a very early age that gave me trust in my body. It also, there's a moment as a gymnast, and it's a moment that happens multiple times every time you practice. And so when I say as a gymnast, I talk about practice. By the time I left, I was doing 4 or 5 days a week for 3 or 4 hours a day. That was my practice. It was intense. And there are moments that happen hundreds and thousands of times as a gymnast where you leap off the floor and you do not know where your body's going to land. And you have to figure it out, right? And yes, you practice for it and you train for it and you drill for it. But there is that moment where you leap, where all you can do is trust. And you have to trust yourself. Now, that doesn't mean you don't get hurt. I broke my hand, I broke my toes, I blew out my knee. It's not that it always ends up. It doesn't always end up well, right? That's not and actually my career ended because of an injury. But it is, I think what it gave me is a complete willingness to leap. To leap and to trust my body and to trust myself to land. And I don't know how to get that lesson any other way.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah. This is, I'm so impacted. I've never heard you explain it this way. We just haven't gone into this level of depth about it. And I have a question that I want to put a pin on.
Okay.
Which is, how does this understanding that the way for you to know things, right, is in your body, how does it inform your facilitation work? Right? So that's a question that I'm holding. And I want to say, as I hold it, that when you as you know, when I talk about like my purpose in life, I talk about the being centrally concerned with our evolutionary leap, right? Like the fact that the only way the species can meet this moment, right, is by taking that kind of leap. So at some point, I would love to learn more about what you know about leaping, right?
Yeah.
That we can that can inform this central life quest. But first, I am really curious to know, how does this awareness about how we learn come into your facilitation work?
That's great. And I think part of the reason I feel drawn to your work and drawn to working with you is because that idea of leaping just makes sense to me. It just, like you say it, I'm like, yep, that makes sense. And so I think that that's like a key. I would love to, I don't have the answer to that question yet, so I'd love to dive into that. How does it show up in my facilitation, or how does it impact my facilitation? I I wish I could bring the physical into my facilitation practice more. Actually, I think about things like, how are we giving people time to be in their bodies? How are we in places where people can feel nurtured for their bodies and their bodies? But I also want to say, like, I don't know that everyone experiences that need to like move things through their body to integrate it, right? I'm really clear that that's something I feel very strongly. And so in my facilitation practice, what it means is I need to be places I can go out for a run. I mean, like, at any given moment, I will try to turn upside down, right? I'll try to find a wall and do a handstand.
That is so true.
Right? I just like, there's something, right, that for me, like, kind of feels like it's funny for the group, but I'm like, yeah, I got to get there. Like, I got to get into my body. And so I love it when I'm thinking about a particular colleague, Wendy Morris, she's a dancer. And so she brings that into a group. Like, I want that. I don't know that in my facilitation practice, I bring that very strongly. Besides my own practice, giving people permission, trying to set the conditions by which they have time to do that. And one of our big clients right now is a provincial sports organization. And so I feel like I can talk to them. Like, we talk in the same ways to each other because many of them are former athletes. And so there's just like a little, there's like a little cultural thing, right? It's just like, yeah, right there. They play hard, they work hard, they're not afraid. And it's just, it's like a cultural thing, I think, that comes from being an athlete. So I get along and work with those kind of folks really well. But I do feel like there's a gap in my practice where I'm so physical, but I don't necessarily bring that into my facilitation. So it's great to work with people who can and do. And I feel like in some ways you do that, right? Like, I'm just picturing you in the center of a circle, like pulling people down, like using your body to ground. I think I do that, but not in the same physical way that you do. So I like to partner with people who can bring that, because I don't exactly have it.
I'd be really curious to, next time we're designing something together, give this a little bit more thought. I am at this current stage of understanding, like what I know now, and it will hopefully, we'll keep learning. But what I know now has me pretty radically committed to the body as the place where it all goes down. Yeah. Like the overratedness of thinking it's wild.
That's right.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And I don't mean thinking like, let's have good ideas and like let's plan things. I don't mean that, but I mean thinking our way out of a problem. Yeah. Right? Finding the argument that will get us
right.
Because I think so much of what we are learning is that logic is secondary, that we are being moved by affect, right?
Yeah. And
affect comes with sensation.
That's right.
Affect is in the body, right? I'm really interested in going deeper there.
Well, and I would love that. And so, yes, we're actually going to design something soon. Let's make sure that we do that, because my brain went a couple different ways. One is that I think that's part of why people appreciate. So this is a cultural piece, right? I feel like I want to be really self-deprecating now. Deborah Fries calls it pathological modesty we have in Columbus, Ohio. But so I think that I would say that that's one of the things that people are attracted to in your facilitation for, is this embodiment, right? That somehow, I don't like the word model, but somehow gives permission for people to be in their bodies. Like, that's something actually I get back from people. Like, you seem like you're really in your body. Like, I get that feedback, and somehow it permissions the body to come into facilitation. I would like to be more intentional about that, but I see you doing the same thing, right? So I wouldn't want to underestimate that. And then, of course, the other thing that comes to me that I think as we design something around body is, and I do not want to go down the rabbit hole of trauma, but I think it's worth thinking about how it can be challenging for folks who have been physically or sexually traumatized to be in their bodies. And so sometimes an embodied facilitator who just gives that little bit of permission to ground and be in your body is pretty radical, or gives more space, or gives an opening to the physical. And I'd like to work with that more. And I always share, like, folks ask all of the time about my facilitation practice and my, system change. And I always say, like, you gotta have, like, for me, like, you have to have a practice, and I think you have to have multiple practices, but if one can be physical, right, that's
Well, I'm glad you said that. And I'll share a little bit about my relationship to all of this. But first, I will say something. I ask you a question that you don't have to answer. I'm kind of hoping you don't answer, which is, as a Midwesterner with what did Deborah call that?
Pathological modesty.
How can you possibly partner with somebody that thinks as highly of themselves, somebody that is so far from modest as I am? I'm kind of realizing how much of a contrast we are when it comes to that.
Right. Yes. I will say, when I introduced you on our podcast, you said, just say he's gangsta. I'm like, what? Who says that? Who actually leads with that? Oh, Gibrán leads with that. Gibrán, it's part of your charm. I don't know. And I find it funny and delightful. And look, Midwesterners don't say other people have to be pathologically modest. It's just how we're going to be. So,
It's hilarious. No, thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating me. I will say about this body part. I have a coordination problem.
Mm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And what that meant for me was that I didn't engage in athletics because I couldn't catch a ball or throw it, right? In any way that made sense. And in the culture, what it came down to was like, well, that's not what you're good at, don't do it. Versus now, I think, no, it means you got to work harder at it. but not doing it shouldn't be the option.
Right.
So then I had a little bit of a story in my head. And I'm also, I can be quite intellectual. So I had a bit of a story in my head where I'm more in my head than in my body. But then I noticed feedback about my embodiment that contradicted my story, right? And I say this to say, and I say this to invite others into embodied practice. That's what I'm saying. The reason why I'm bringing this up is actually it's not, I don't think it's an option.
Right.
I think some form of tending to the body is integral, definitely to doing this work, but also to being a more free human being. And I say my story because for me, that hasn't been any traditional athletic or sport activity.
Right, but have you seen yourself dance?
Yeah.
Right? Like you're totally embodied.
Right?
Like that. It's that narrative around what athlete is, right? What sport is. And I actually think it's so interesting that you say now, folks, the narrative would be more, you're not good at, so you have to try harder. What's happening, and I just happen to know this because I have a client in sport, what's happening is kids are being funneled into one sport so early. Like you have this kind of body or you have this kind of skill. And what of course that's terrible for children. And let me say that starting gymnastics at 5 and being in their hours of the gym every day, like I got a lot positive to say about it, but I could also say a lot negative about it. There's a movement in sport called multi-sport, which is that kids need to just engage in multiple different sports because they're not going to be good at everything. And they actually need different big muscle groups and different skills. And so, you can't catch and throw, but maybe your feet are fantastic. Or maybe, you actually have more precise movement. So something like ballet or, so there's actually a movement in sport it's not only about access economically, access body-wise to what is the sport your body can do, because it is so incredibly important. I mean, like the research is out there around how sport impacts, academic achievement, but it's not even about achievement. It's actually about being a well-rounded person. For me, my running practice is as much spiritual as it is physical. Right? I just happen to enter that spiritual practice through my body. And so I think I love what you just said. I easily identify as an athlete just as I was from an early age. But that's not an identity the majority of people have, but it doesn't mean their body isn't accessible to them or understanding through their bodies.
That's beautiful. No, this is very helpful. Thank you. And this part that you were talking about this kind of coming into your body multiple times a day, having to find that balance and the implications that had for your healing. It's so clear to me, and it moves me to pieces. And I want to go back to something else that you said, and you were very explicit in your request. You don't want to go down the rabbit hole of trauma. but this is a conversation I want to invite here for a second, at least to touch on, because I think you and I have had really interesting conversations about this. One of the things that I appreciate about you is how transparent and clear you are about your own experience, your personal experience of trauma, but also, the years of time that you spent working with women facing trauma, and really harrowing stories you've shared, powerful, challenging stuff, and so that's why I think you're the best person to talk about this with, because as facilitators, part of what's happening as the culture is changing, particularly in spaces that are, I want to call it either more progressive or more movement centered, or whatever the right word is, the spaces in which we end up working. There's a well-developed discourse on trauma. And I think of it as a huge advance, as a net positive. Absolutely. Right?
Absolutely.
So we are being together, we're learning to be together by holding the awareness that there's such a thing as generational trauma.
Right. Yeah.
That there's such a thing as communal trauma.
Yeah.
Right? And that there's significant trauma that comes from the structures of oppression of our country, right? And those understandings, I think, are liberating.
Huge. Yeah, absolutely.
What I find challenging, what I'm having to adapt to, is in facilitation, it's almost like, I'm going to oversimplify it. Sometimes it feels like you can do less, that you can ask less of people, that you can push people less because maybe they've had trauma, right? And since you want to be inclusive of all, what you do is you don't do things that might trigger someone's trauma. And so, right, and so, what is the balance of care, right? And certainly, I mean, for me, a clear one is being really, really inviting when it comes to consent, right? But there's, how do you work with it?
So I guess I want to start by saying I haven't figured it out, right? So just to kind of name that, that I still get in moments of like, what is happening here? And I think it's because my experience being a trauma therapist, working with women and children who were experiencing some of the most horrific trauma that anyone can experience, abuse at the hands of someone you love and who loves you, right? So there's no bigger betrayal than that. So my experience of those wonderful people was like, they were not fragile. And so for me, being a trauma survivor actually indicates huge amounts of, I don't love the word resilience, but hardiness, sturdiness, endurance, perseverance, all of the things that when trauma comes into our spaces is exactly the opposite of what people are asking for, right? They're asking to be, I don't even know sometimes what they're asking for. But when I think of trauma and trauma survivors, which is why this discourse it can be quite challenging for me to engage in, because my experiences of women who just gotten beaten by their husband that morning, coming together and laughing that night and holding hands and yes, crying and figuring it out together. And there wasn't a whole lot of room for, this is so hard for me. What am I going to do? Right? Or I can't possibly, the space isn't safe. And so what am I going to do? Like that actually just wasn't part of what was happening. And you've said to me, right, like I'm going to paraphrase and I'm going to do it badly, but you've said something like, we are the people of Malcolm X. When did we get so like our feelings hurt, right? Like, and that's how I feel sometimes in these spaces. And it's not at all. I'm with you 100%. I love the acknowledgement of trauma. I think the acknowledgement of trauma, whether it's collective or generational or personal, I think that acknowledgement is one of the very first steps that helps people move into healing. I do not think we can go anywhere without acknowledging that trauma. My experience, however, is that you gotta do something next. You can't just sit around and talk about your trauma. And that's not what I experienced with the women I was working with. Yes, absolutely. We talked about their trauma. But then we made a safety plan. And then we talked about what you were going to do the next day. And there's some forward momentum, I think, that's needed, and how in these spaces I try to work with it. Acknowledge, witness, affirm, and move forward. It's not acknowledge, witness, affirm, and stay there.
I'm so glad. Thank you. That's part of my observation too. And I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for what you're articulating now, but really for holding this the way you hold it in your life, but in our relationship. I feel it's not that I haven't been hurt. I've been hurt. Yeah. I've had some hard things happen in my life, but when you kind of compare traumas, right? Mm-hmm. I've had it pretty good. Yeah. I've had it pretty good, right? Like maybe not a wealthy family, but just like grew up with good people. Yeah. And there were hurts, but not nothing like what you're talking about, right? Right. And so to be in this conversation with somebody that comes from their own experience and also has worked deeply with folks that have been through so much, it's really moving to be in this conversation with you and to find resonance. So I am involved in healing modalities, mm-hmm. right? From spiritual to shamanic practices, right? And so I spend time, and of course the facilitation work it's definitely a healing modality of sorts, but outside of the kind of more professional spaces. And that implies an incredible amount of connection and compassion and seeing of people's hurts, right? And being with. So I say that again to kind of say, look, this is something that I'm sensitive to and care about. But I think what is happening and where I interrupted you is there seems to be a payoff right now for being a victim. Right? There seems to be a way in which our spaces organized around victimhood that actually give the person who has been victimized a kind of payoff. And what that does subconsciously is that rather than doing what you said, which is work through it, is we're rocking it. We're rocking our trauma, right? Carrying around this identity. Because there's a little bit of a payoff that we get from it. Not a little bit, sometimes a really big one.
It's a huge payoff. I think at this point it's a huge payoff. And that, I think, and so I have to be careful because sometimes it actually quite offends me. Mm-hmm. Having worked with women who would come in with bruises on their face, who were not interested in rocking their trauma at all, right? Like what they were interested in doing is finding out what they were going to do next. And so I can get like into this offended place, in my own personal trauma history. I'm like, oh, come the fuck on. Which is not my best self. right? And that's not the self I try to bring to facilitation. But I think that there can be an individual payoff that is a collective detriment, right? Because then we don't, as a group, move forward together. I am not in any way saying that people should not work with their personal trauma. I think actually that's really key. I think that's what I do in my off time. I do not bring it to the groups I'm working with and expect them to attend to it instead of doing some work together. And so I think, sometimes you and I talk about working with adults. That's kind of like, and it's not to be insulting to anyone, but that's like who I want to work with. I want to work with people who say like, yep, this hurt happened. And I'm willing to do my healing on it. And I'm willing to know that healing will come through taking some action together, but I'm not going to hold everybody up around my particular trauma. I had this moment, it's a really interesting moment because of course, I said, I don't know why I picked going into that sexual assault office as a junior, but of course I know why. I was raped as a freshman in college and I was raped in my early life. And that, so of course there was like something working in me to do that work. And so for many years, survivor was a key part of my identity, and not in like, I want to hold up the group, but like, yeah, look, I did that. I survived that and I've healed from it and I'm doing healing. And, I had this moment in a workshop, the presencing workshop, Otto Scharmer's presencing workshop years and years ago. Like, I didn't have my second child. So more than 10 years ago when it was like a 5-day long, 30-person immersive workshop. It isn't that any longer. And we did this, this game where we went, of course, right? Something like the 4 directions, and you have someone talk to you and they're a wizard and they're a shaman and all the things that you do. And naturally, our worlds.
I haven't done that one, but I like it.
So, and I had like, it was actually like it was not my first moment of presence. It was my first professional moment of presence. And, so we're walking around this board and my partner was asking me questions and I had like this download that was like, who you are. And I understood that meant my survivorship. Who you are is an important and will inform, but it is not who you will be. And I shed that identity. Like it just like just in a moment, just shed that identity. Of course I know I'm a survivor. Of course that informs every single part of my life. It is not central. That victimization is not central to my identity. I don't need to build my work around it. I don't need to build my family around it. I don't need to build my identity around it. And yet the beauty of it is that experience of trauma, that experience, what I learned from it can absolutely inform who I am, but it is not who I am. And I think that for me was one of those turning points that seems relevant to this conversation, because I think many of us, and in really good ways, right? It is amazing for women to walk into, or in men to walk into services where they hear your trauma is real and you have survived it. You are a survivor. Like that is transformative stuff. It is not, however, the end of your work, right? It's actually just the beginning of your work. And so wow. I think that is, as a facilitator, that's why it's part of the reason I move from individual to collective space. And part of why I believe the collective spaces and the action we take and the work we do together will absolutely heal some of that, but it's not the point. That's why I'm not a therapist anymore, right? Like it's not my work. I feel like I've meandered, but
No, thank you, Tuesday. I have a couple of thoughts I want to offer in gratitude and inspiration. But you said as you were speaking some pretty serious things about some pretty challenging experiences you've had, and I know you've done the work, and so you can say them with yeah. ease and health. And I know that from my own bad experiences. I know I can talk about things in my past that have been healed, and I have a commitment that I have made to myself, which is when a woman shares something like that with me, I need to say that I am sorry. And I am sorry, not abstractly, I'm sorry for my role, right? In whatever contribution I have made to this patriarchal culture, to this toxic masculinity, inevitably, I have been a part of that, and I'm so conscious of it as you speak that I just want to pause for a second and say that.
Thank you.
Thank you for hearing it. Thank you for hearing it. I think we men need to take responsibility. I wanted to say something. Looking at the time, I wanted to say something. I have a couple of kind of closing questions to ask you, but I want to make a kind of fun proposal / announcement of sorts.
Oh, okay.
Well, I feel like I have been kind of informally having conversations with different people that care about facilitation, that care about equity, that care about racial justice, that care about liberation.
Yeah.
About this topic that you and I are wrestling with right now, and you are one of the people that I've spoken most concretely about it with. So you and I have talked about, we've kind of been funny in our language, but we've talked about creating a space that is safe from safe spaces, right? and it's not to diminish the importance of a safe space, but what we've talked about and is to have a space that people consent into, opt into, right?
Yeah.
And it's a space that says what has happened to us merits our anger and our rage. Yes. And if you need to have anger and rage, if that's part of that's kind of the part of the journey you're on, you should have it. You need to work, right? And what we've been through as people, and in our individual lives, and we're wrestling with even now, merits our healing and our understanding, and kind of our naming of trauma and the need for safety and for protection and for that kind of tending to, right? And we're saying that those things matter, that people should have them.
Absolutely.
But we're also saying that we want to experiment with spaces where that's not what we're leading with.
Yeah.
Right? And that we're doing it intentionally. And it's not that there should ever be like a long-term space where we do not acknowledge the anger and the hurt and the trauma, but for experimental purposes, we're creating a space where that discourse is not allowed.
Yeah.
Where we contend with our reality, or with our structural reality, right? We look at the structural reality at oppression, at racism, at all these things, but we refuse, right? We refuse to take a victim perspective in doing so.
Yes. Are you saying you're going to convene us? Is that what you're saying?
No, not me. I'm saying we. And that's why I said it's like a proposal / announcement, because in some ways we have been talking about this already, right? Even though we haven't kind of moved into it more seriously. But as we talk about it on the podcast, if people respond, right? If we hear from folks encouraging us to move this forward, I think we need to at least experiment,
absolutely.
With creating the kind of space.
That is so exciting. I feel like there are many of us that are hungry for it, right? We know that something's happening in the discourse that's important around acknowledging trauma, and yet we still continue to get stuck. And so I'm completely up for that. And would love to be with kindreds who are interested in exploring what that looks like. And there's something, and I've said it before about working with you, and I feel it about myself, those years, my own early life experience, but also those years working with trauma survivors. Like, I'm never going to forget that. Like, I don't have to worry. Like, I'm not ever going to become ungrounded, right? Like, I'm not ever going to deny that is the reality that we're living in. Right? I know that. I carry that in my bones. And I feel like you're the same way. I feel like there's no part of you that denies the hardness of what is happening and has been happening and continues to happen to our people and so our peoples in so many ways. And so it's like, what is a foundation of actually just knowing that reality and moving from there, right? how did you say it? You said not getting caught in victimhood. And I think that's part of it for me. And I would love to pull together people who are interested in being their very highest selves in it. Right. So it's not only just not like retreating into victimhood, but actually expanding into our best selves to take it on with all the maturity and wisdom and laughter. Because I don't know, when you're with people who are traumatized, they laugh a lot. It's not really serious all the time. That's not what's happening.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you say that. And we need to pause, but here it is. We've made the proposal. We put it out into the world. Let's see how people respond. But I do think there's a hunger for this, particularly like we started the conversation. This is the time where the equity conversation, people are paying more attention to it. So there's opportunity here. There's great opportunity. Thank you, Tuesday. I am really excited about this possibility. And the last thing I'll say about it is, the idea of post-traumatic growth. Like what has happened to us is exactly what has prepared us to meet this moment in humanity, where we're facing the potential for collapse. I wanted to ask you two questions that are meant to be quick.
Are you saying like be quiet? Be quiet.
No, that's not what.
He's like, let's just keep this. But I already mentioned time. Like, pull it together, Ryan-Hart. Like, make a question. Okay, I'll do my best. We'll see.
I can't believe you're giving me a hard time. You know that these are classic facilitation moves. You don't have to call me out on them. But
no, I do. I do. I am who I am. I have to.
So I don't need you to tell me where you see yourself in 10 years, but I want to invite you to see yourself in 10 years. Take a wild guess, right? Like if you can take a leap, a decade ahead, a decade from now. That's not my question. That's just my invitation. Right. Can you picture it?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a sense?
Absolutely.
Do you know what your body feels like there?
Yep.
Beautiful. All right. What is the best advice that version of you 10 years from now has for you right now?
I think she would just say dance.
Oh, that is so moving and beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. There's lots behind that, Gibrán, but I think that's what she would tell me.
Wow. And have you been dancing?
I've been trying. I mean, like, look, that is my full-on intent at this phase in my life, is to dance my way to that.
I did see you on the dance floor at the Bali Summit. I did notice that. So, then the other question is a little bit more. The question that I have promised myself that I would ask the powerful women in my life. In this time where the ugliness of men is kind of being shown, taking center stage, right? It's not that it hasn't been there, but now we can really see it. People have the courage to call it out, right? This Me Too moment. One of my projects is called the Better Man Project, and it's a way. It's a way to tackle this question, this problem of toxic masculinity by inviting conscious masculinity. And the question that I have is, what advice or what words do you have for men in these times? What can we do? What should we pay attention to?
Yeah, I've heard you ask this of the other women on the podcast, and my answer is always the same. And I guess I'm just going to give it. I wish it were more profound, but my answer is stop hurting us. Like, stop it. Make the decision today that you're going to stop hurting us, because that will change the world. If you simply make that decision, it will change the world. And I mentioned my grandfather early in this podcast, and I am his person, right? Like, I am like directly his. And He made the decision in his life one day to stop drinking. He stopped drinking. He made the decision in his life one day to have the life he wanted, and he left his marriage and had the life he wanted. And so my image of a strong, caring, loving, fierce man is that when they decide to do something, they just do it. And so what I would say is like, decide to stop hurting us and it will stop.
Wow. Thank you. Mm-hmm. What a powerful answer. And thank you for taking the time to be in conversation with me today. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your partnership in this facilitation work.
Yeah.
It's one of the coolest developments of of my work in the last couple of years. It's really exciting to work with you. Yeah.
It's great. It's fun. It's fun. That is like what I want my work to be. Deep, grounded, fun, and like doing shit. And that's,
yes.
Like that's what I feel like I get with you. So I'm thrilled to do it. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I have a feeling this will not be our last go around, but I'm really excited about this conversation. I can't wait to put it out into the world.